How are we doing there? Today we are going to do a lab activity called cation tests. What we're going to do is we're going to test for some different positive ions, some cations. The experiment is divided into 3 parts. The first part, we'll do a test to determine whether a compound contains copper or nickel. The second part, we'll do a test to determine whether a compound contains iron 2 or iron 3. And in the third part, calcium or zinc. So let's get into it. Let's go check out our different compounds here. All right, so for the first part of this activity, we're going to do this activity in 3 parts. The first part, we're going to look at copper 2 ions and nickel 2 ions. Okay. Here I have a compound. This is copper 2 sulfate. This is nickel 2 nitrate. And this is the mystery compound. We're going to try to identify whether this contains copper 2 ions or nickel 2 ions, right? Now, according to our lab handout, we can test for copper 2 ions by adding ammonium hydroxide, okay? If what we're adding it to has copper 2 ions, then we should get a light blue precipitate. We should get a light blue like powder floating in our liquid there. And adding more ammonium hydroxide will form a deep blue solution. Okay? We can test for nickel 2 ions by adding sodium hydroxide. We should get a light green precipitate if it contains nickel 2 ions. And adding more will not dissolve the precipitate. So let us go ahead and set this up and perform some of these tests and see how it goes here. Now I have another camera set up looking at my little dish here, my little spot plate that I'm going to do the experiment in. I'm going to turn on that camera here. And let us add some of our things. Now in these columns, I'm going to put my copper 2 sulfate in this and this. And then I'm going to put my nickel nitrate in this column right here into these 2 wells. And I'm going to put my unknown in these 2 wells. Okay, so you can see I put at the top what I'm going to add in that column. And then over along the side, I put what test I'm going to do. So this is my copper 2 compound, and I'm going to do the copper test there. So this one, I should detect copper. This is my nickel compound, and I'm going to do the copper test, so I should not detect copper. And the same thing for the next row. I'll do the nickel test. So when I do the nickel test to the copper compound, I should not detect nickel. But when I do it to the nickel compound, I should detect nickel. And then we'll see which one the unknown behaves like. Okay, so let me add some of my copper solution. This is the copper sulfate. I'm going to add a little bit in there. This is my nickel nitrate. I'm going to add here. Here. And then let's do the copper test. I'm going to add ammonium hydroxide for the copper test here. I'm going to add a few drops into the copper compound, and let's see what happens. Can you see we formed this deep blue, right? If I add more, it just gets deeper blue. But now let's look what happens when we do it to the nickel compound. So we do it to the nickel compound right here. Doesn't look like a whole lot's happening there. Which is exactly what we suspect. The nickel compound doesn't contain copper. All right, let's do the nickel test to those 2. So I'm going to add sodium hydroxide. Let's add the sodium hydroxide first to the copper compound and see what happens. We should not detect nickel here. And you see maybe we get a little bit of a blue precipitate. But now let's do it to the nickel compound and see what happens. That one, it looks like we have, it's kind of hard to see. I don't know how well you can see it on the camera. We have a little bit of a green precipitate in there, which is what the nickel test suggests, is that we should see a green precipitate. Okay, now let's take a look at our unknown. We know how those behave. Well, let's see what this does. I'm going to put some in here, and I'm going to put some in here. There's my unknown. Let's do the copper test first. Not seeing a whole lot happening there. Oh, I just added more copper to that. I just messed that one up. Okay, that was the wrong thing to add. I add copper to the mystery. Let's put the copper in the third well down here. That third well is the copper. Since I messed this one up, we're going to pretend this one is that one. So let's do the copper test to this unknown compound and see what happens. We're going to add some of that in there. And that looks an awful lot like what happens for the when we detect copper. Now let's do the nickel test to our unknown compound. And it doesn't look very much like nickel. It looks like what copper does during the nickel test. Right. So I am going to conclude that my unknown here contains copper 2 ion and not nickel. Now let's take a look at the second part. All right, for the second part here, we're going to look at iron 2 and iron 3. Okay. In this here container, I have some iron 2 sulfate, and in this here, I have iron 3 nitrate. Okay. And then again, I have the mystery solution. It's either got iron 2 or iron 3, and we're going to see. Okay, now this one is a little bit simpler. We're just going to add sodium hydroxide to each one, and if we get a green precipitate, we've got iron 2. If we get a brown precipitate, we got iron 3. So let's take a look at the spot plate here. I'm going to put some iron 2 into the first well. I'm going to put some iron 3 into the second well. And then I'm going to put some of my mystery solution underneath my question marks here. It's one or the other one. Already it kind of looks like one and not like the other one. So let's put some sodium hydroxide and see how they behave. Okay. The iron 2, we should get a green precipitate. And yep, I can see a green precipitate in there. Hopefully you can see it well. For the iron 3, we should get a brown precipitate. And yep, that's definitely a brown precipitate. It's kind of copper colored. Hopefully you can see it well. And now let's add this to our mystery and see which one it is. Well, that looks like the brown precipitate. That would be the iron 3 ions. So my mystery solution contains iron 3 ions. All right, now let's take a look at the third part. The third part is between calcium and zinc ions. All right, now let's do our experiment to determine calcium and zinc. So here, this is calcium chloride. Notice calcium is the only cation here that we're talking about that doesn't have a Roman numeral with it. Remember, Roman numerals go with the transition metals, and some of the post-transition metals, when they can have multiple different charges. But calcium is not a transition metal. Calcium is an alkaline earth metal, so we know its charge has to be positive too. So we don't need to include a Roman numeral to say what its charge is. So this here is the calcium compound. It's calcium chloride. And this here is my zinc compound. It is zinc nitrate. That would be zinc 2 nitrate. And then I have my mystery. It might be one, it might be the other. It's either got calcium or it's got zinc. Okay, now if you look at your handout, the tests for calcium and zinc both involve adding sodium hydroxide. And either way, you should get a white precipitate. But if we keep adding sodium hydroxide, if we were looking at zinc, that precipitate will eventually redissolve. And if we're looking at calcium, it will not redissolve. So we're going to see a white precipitate either way, and we want to determine, will it redissolve, and we have zinc, or will it not redissolve, and we have calcium. Okay, let me turn this on, and let's add our calcium. And these are clear liquids, and we're going to get a white precipitate, so I hope we can see things on the camera. I'm kind of skeptical we'll be able to see it very well on the camera. Here's my zinc compound. and my unknown. Okay, let me add the sodium hydroxide to perform the test. So with the calcium, that's hard to see against the white background. I'm going to remove the paper, and maybe we'll be able to see, I hope. I can see a little bit of a white precipitate in there. What about with the zinc? Again, I can see a little bit of the white precipitate. So let me add some more and see if we get redissolve. Yeah, this one's hard to see. It looks like in my zinc compound, some of that precipitate has gone away, and the calcium compound, it has not. So that's what we expected from our tests. Let's do the unknown and see which one it behaves like. So I'm going to put some in the unknown here. And already I'm thinking it looks more like the calcium. The zinc produced more precipitate, it seemed like. So continue adding. And we've got a little precipitate in there, but it has not gone away. So I'm thinking that that unknown is the calcium. It's the calcium compound. All right, so there you go. We have performed some different tests to try to identify some different cations. We identified copper, copper-2, and nickel-2. We identified iron-2 and iron-3, and calcium and zinc. So until next time, take it easy.